This is a time for war.
Welcome to the Deep Journal Global YouTube channel. After weeks, the war in the Middle East is approaching one big inferno after another. For a long time now, the IDF has been destroying the territory of Gaza, parcel by parcel. For the IDF, the culmination of this war is the complete destruction of Hamas. And for the complete destruction of Hamas, the Israeli authorities know that it is imperative to enter the welfare state. At the moment, the whole world is trying to prevent the IDF from entering Gaza, primarily for the sake of Palestinian civilians. But Netanyahu is taking a new step every minute to achieve his goal. Today, in a carefully planned operation, the Israeli army launched attacks on parts of Rafah. With the destruction of the tunnels there the other day, Hamas has nowhere to run. This IDF offensive was extremely bloody. Many Hamas militants were killed by Israeli fire. The growth of these attacks is now very frightening for the Palestinian population. Rafah is now home to more than 1.3 million Palestinians who fled the war elsewhere in Gaza. Palestinians have filled almost every inch of Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza, with tents. The estimated 1.5 million people sheltering there, more than half of Gaza's population, are forced to wait because they have nowhere to flee. United Nations officials warned that an attack on Rafah would be catastrophic, with more than 600,000 miners becoming targets of attack. A relocation to the town and its environs could also lead to the collapse of the humanitarian system trying to keep the people of Gaza alive. Israel's Western allies have also expressed concern. But Israel says that Rafah must be taken in order to destroy Hamas and release the Israeli hostages still being held. As we all know, Rafah now seems to be the biggest stronghold of Hamas members. Israel is therefore emphasizing that an operation in Rafah is inevitable. In Rafah, as elsewhere in the Gaza Strip, food is scarce. Crowds gather around a bakery, hoping for a few pita bread to feed their families. Others cook their own meals on mud stoves with whatever flour they can find. There is a serious hunger problem in the region right now. The streets without tents are filled with crowds of Palestinians trying to feed their families. Despite the world's opposition to this ground operation, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israel's military operation against Rafah in Gaza would bring Israel complete victory over Hamas in just a few weeks. This followed a major raid by the Israel Defense Forces in the West Bank. The Palestinian Health Ministry announced that Israeli soldiers liquidated 3 Palestinians in an overnight raid on a refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli army said all 3 of the dead were Palestinian attackers, including a senior commander from the Jihad group. The raid was the latest in a spike in violence in the Palestinian territories since the start of the Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip on October 7th. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Ramallah said the attacks in the West Bank were very violent and people were restless. The Israeli army claimed that the attackers were hiding among the population and that the population supported them. Video footage posted on social media shows Israeli military vehicles entering Farah in the dark. Assem Mansour, head of the camp's popular committee, said, "Dozens of young men and armed men in the camp confronted the forces before requesting more reinforcements. This included bulldozers digging up the camp's streets and attacking water and sewage networks. Of the 3 people killed in the Israeli attack, only 1 was an attacker. The others were civilians and were eliminated by Israeli snipers." The army said its forces were conducting counter-terrorism operations in Tubas and the Farah area. The army said that during the operation, soldiers eliminated Ahmed Daragmeh, a senior commander of the Islamic Jihad terrorist organization in the Tubas area, adding that 2 other militants were killed in the operation. Daragmeh had organized armed and explosive attacks against Israeli soldiers in the past, it said. The army said 1 Israeli soldier was lightly wounded in the operation. The Israeli army has frequently carried out arrest raids in the West Bank. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, at least 403 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli soldiers or settlers in the West Bank since the start of the war in Gaza. According to Israeli figures, Palestinian militants have carried out numerous attacks against Israeli soldiers and civilians in Israel and the West Bank, killing at least 15 people. In the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Israel captured the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which it later unilaterally annexed. Palestinians claim the territory, as well as the war-torn Gaza Strip, for their future independent state. In the wake of all this, some developments regarding the ceasefire have emerged. On the other hand, U.S. President Joe Biden announced the other day that the ceasefire would start in a few days. An Israeli source said that U.S. President Joe Biden's announcement that the ceasefire would begin does not reflect the state of negotiations on the hostage deal, which are far from concluded. Despite progress in the Qatar talks, Israel doubts that the leaked proposal will be accepted as is. According to reports on Israeli news channels, the mediator's proposal for a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas would involve the release of 40 hostages, including adult and female soldiers, in exchange for 400 Palestinian prisoners in the first phase. According to a document published on Channel 12 detailing the outline of the offer, the 40 Israeli hostages to be released include 15 adults over 50, 13 hostages in poor health, and 7 women. According to the proposal, the 5 female soldiers held by Hamas would be released in the first batch in exchange for finding more serious criminals. According to this report, the ratio is 10 Palestinian prisoners for every Israeli hostage. Channel 12 published a more detailed ratio based on the American proposal. According to the report, 7 women will be released for 21 Palestinian prisoners. In addition, 40 Palestinian prisoners released in 2011 in exchange for Israeli hostage Gilad Shalit, who was later re-imprisoned, would also be released. In addition to all this, the Iranian threat remains. In response to the growing Iranian threat, the Israeli Air Force, IAF, has established a unit dedicated to countering Tehran's growing hostility towards Israel. The newly established Iran unit, led by Major General Tomer Bar, is a show of force not only to Iran but also to the United States, highlighting concerns about perceived gaps in Iran's nuclear ambitions and its support for terrorism. The unit's mandate includes overseeing military preparations for potential Iranian threats, with a particular emphasis on countering Iran's nuclear ambitions. Moreover, it signals Israel's readiness to counter Iranian-backed aggression in several areas, including Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Iran is currently pulling the strings of a regional proxy war in which its members have come out in support of the Hamas offensive, in a war that is escalating in a way that is attracting the attention of international actors, including the US and the UK. In recent years, Israel has stepped up airstrikes against Syria in an effort to curb Tehran's growing dependence on air supply routes to deliver weapons to its allies in Syria and Lebanon, and especially to Hezbollah. The news of the new contingent contradicts claims by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who said last week that the Israeli Air Force did not have the resources to stop Iran's nuclear program through military action during the two countries' shadow war. Olmert, a longtime rival of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, made the following statement the other day: "We can destroy their headquarters, important projects, railroads, highways, airports. Israel can do a lot to damage Iran's infrastructure, but Israel has no way to destroy Iran's nuclear program." In the wake of all this, Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh called on members of the Axis of Resistance supporting Gaza to increase their participation in the war against Israel. The other day, Mr. Haniyeh called on the Arab world to support the resistance in Gaza and the West Bank with money and weapons before it is too late. Mr. Haniyeh said Hamas has shown flexibility in negotiations with Israel, but is ready to continue the struggle. Mr. Haniyeh called on brotherly Arab countries to deter the enemy and reject its occupation of Rafah. He also called for an end to the Israeli siege of starvation in the northern Gaza Strip. Mr. Haniyeh said that the resistance carried out the October 7th attack at a time when Israel is trying to liquidate the Palestinian cause. Mr. Haniyeh continued, "The attempts to liquidate the cause began when former U.S. President Donald Trump recognized East Jerusalem as the capital of Israel." Haniyeh called on Palestinians in Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank to march to Al-Aqsa Mosque on the first day of Ramadan to pray and break the siege. Haniyeh continued, "The siege of Gaza and Al-Aqsa Mosque are the same, and if all the components of the Palestinian people join the battle, it will break the siege of Al-Aqsa Mosque and Gaza. As we can see, neither side is willing to give up." Thank you for tuning in.